Hello everyone, welcome to HFY Beyond Terror. This channel is all about HFY and sci-fi stories, where humanity's underestimated and then proves...
The first time Lynn Calder saw Commander Siri Vorn, he mistook her for a statue. She stood at the center of Dock 12 like a monument to every warning label the galaxy had ever printed. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in layered armor plates that looked grown rather than forged. The Veskari didn't wear metal the way humans did. Their suits were living composites, dark matte chitin interlaced with pale seams that shimmered faintly when light crossed them, as if the material remembered being a reef once. Around her, crew moved with the careful choreography of people crossing a frozen lake. No one ran. No one laughed. Even the clank of tool carts sounded muted, like the dock itself didn't want to offend her. Lynn had been briefed on her record during the long shuttle ride from the Terran courier. Decorated in 2 border conflicts, notorious for never retreating, rumored to have once held a breach with her bare hands after her shield failed. The rumors were probably embellished, but the dock workers' faces were. They were the kind of faces you saw in old war documentaries. Respect wrapped around fear, knotted tight so it wouldn't show. Lynn adjusted the strap of his kit bag and approached anyway because that was his job now. Systems artisan, civilian specialist, the one they called when a piece of alien tech refused to make sense. Commander Vorn didn't turn as he came within speaking distance. Her head was angled toward the open void beyond the force field where a freight tug drifted like a lazy thought. If she had been human, he might have said she was watching stars. But Veskari eyes were set deeper, glinting under ridged brows, and their faces were a sculptor's challenge. Hard lines, minimal softness, beauty measured by a standard that didn't include approachable. "Commander Siri Vorn," Lynn said, careful and calm. Her helmet's lower vents exhaled with a sound like a tide pulling back. Slowly she turned. The movement was economical, not threatening, yet it tightened Lynn's shoulders anyway. "Yes," she said. Her voice came through a translator clipped to her collar, but the cadence beneath the device was all her. Low, deliberate, a note of iron. "I'm Lynn Calder, Terran Engineering Corps contracted. They assigned me to assist with your..." He glanced at his data pad. "Ion lattice regulator. The feed says it's cycling out of tolerance." Vorn's gaze dragged over him from boots to hairline as if cataloging vulnerabilities. Lynn held still not because he was paralyzed, but because he'd learned that sudden motion around predators, real or perceived, made things worse. "You are the human who mends what others cannot," Vorn said. "That's a flattering way to put it," Lynn replied. "Mostly I just ask the equipment nicely." Something in her posture shifted. If he hadn't been watching closely, he'd have missed it. A fractional pause, like her mind had snagged on the idea of a machine being asked anything. "Follow," she said. She walked toward her ship, a Veskari cutter docked like a black shard against the station's steel. Lynn fell into step beside her, keeping a respectful distance. As they passed, dock workers pretended to be fascinated by their own boots. Inside the cutter, the air changed. It smelled faintly of mineral dust and something sharp, like stone warmed under sun. The corridors were narrow for human shoulders, and the lighting was dimmer than Terran standards. Lynn felt as though he'd stepped into a cave designed by someone who trusted darkness more than illumination. They reached the engine bay. The ion lattice regulator sat nested in a cradle of ribbed supports, its surface alive with tiny shifting patterns that looked almost like language. Lynn's fingers itched. He knelt, set his bag down, and began unpacking tools. Vorn remained standing behind him, arms crossed. He could feel her attention the way he could feel pressure changes before a storm. Still, he worked. Because machines had always made more sense than people, and because fear, like a shadow, shrank when you stopped feeding it. After 10 minutes of scanning, he found the problem. Not sabotage, not battle damage, just a misalignment in a self-correcting coil, one that was correcting itself in the wrong direction because someone had calibrated it with an outdated mass reference. Lin glanced up. When was the last time you updated your field constants? Vorn's eyes narrowed. The cutter's constants are correct. Correct for Veskari space, Lin said. But you've been running in Terran consortium lanes. Your background flux is different by just enough to make the coil chase ghosts. She stared at him as if he'd accused her ship of superstition. Lin continued, gentle. It's not a mistake. It's like trying to tune a stringed instrument in a room where the temperature keeps changing. You can be perfect and still drift. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, Vorn crouched, an enormous shape folding down until she was at eye level with him. Lin fought the instinct to lean away. Show, she demanded, so he did. He pulled up the calibration schema, highlighted the constants, and demonstrated the drift over time. The data was undeniable. Vorn watched without blinking. When he finished, she leaned back. You see small wrongness. It's my favorite kind, Lin admitted. Big wrongness tends to be on fire. For the first time, the corners of her mouth twitched, an expression that was not quite a smile, but not nothing either. Proceed, she said. Lin Ray tuned the coil, set the regulator's correction parameters to account for lane variance, and sealed the housing. The lattice hummed, settled, then purred into stable resonance. The bay's light stopped flickering. Lin exhaled. There should hold, Vorn stood. Efficient. I try, Lin said, wiping his hands. He started to pack his tools, and noticed for the first time that Vorn's armor wasn't entirely intact. A seam along her left side, near where the plates overlapped, was cracked. It was a thin crack, but it ran like a lightning strike through the living composite. Beneath it, something pale showed. Skin? Scar tissue? He wasn't sure. You're hurt, Lin said before he could stop himself. Silence slammed into the bay, Vorn's head angled toward him. It is not relevant. It's relevant if your suit's compromised, Lin said, choosing practical language to avoid stepping on pride. If that crack spreads, the composite could fail under acceleration. That could kill you. Vorn's gaze hardened. You presume much. Lin raised both hands, palms out. I presume physics. For several long breaths, neither moved. Lin could hear the soft tick of cooling systems, the distant thrum of station power. His heartbeat felt loud. Then Vorn's arms dropped to her sides. Come, she said, and walked deeper into the ship. Lin followed, uncertain. They reached a compartment that looked like a cross between a medbay and a ritual chamber. The walls were lined with racks of armor plates in various stages of repair. In the center, a low platform sat beneath a ring of lights. Vorn stepped onto the platform. With movements that were practiced and precise, she began unlatching sections of her armor. Lin looked away automatically. Do not avert, Vorn said. He froze mid-turn. Sorry habit. In Veskari crews, a comrade does not pretend wounds are invisible, she said. To look away is to deny the truth of survival. Lin swallowed and turned back, carefully keeping his gaze respectful, not lingering where it shouldn't, but not pretending she wasn't there. Plate by plate, the living armor disengaged and folded away like petals closing. Underneath, Vorn's body was different than he'd expected. The Veskari weren't fully chitinous. Their skin was a deep slate blue, textured with faint ridges that caught the light like ripples in rock. Along her ribs, beneath the cracked seam, a wide scar spread, pale and irregular, not the neat line of a surgical cut, but the jagged memory of something tearing through. Lynn's throat tightened, not because it was grotesque, because it was honest. The scar wasn't a flaw in a perfect design. It was a map of endurance. It said, "I was broken here and I did not die." Vorn watched his face as if searching for the first flicker of disgust. Lynn knelt beside the platform and examined the crack from the armor side. "What did this?" he asked, voice quieter now. "A splinter charge," she said, "a pirate close enough to smell my breath. That sounds unpleasant." "It ended," Vorn said simply, as if ended was something she personally enforced. Lynn ran a scanner over the armor seam. The composite was stressed but repairable. He could weave a reinforcement filament into the living material, encourage it to regrow properly. He hesitated, then asked, "May I touch the armor near the wound? I don't need to touch you, just the composite, but it's connected." Vorn's jaw tightened. "Do what you must." Lynn began working. He spoke as he worked, partly to explain, partly to soften the silence. "I'll seed a support mesh," he said. "It'll act like rebar in concrete. The composite will grow around it. It should stop the cracks spreading." Vorn didn't respond, but she didn't move away either. As Lynn guided the filament into place, his eyes kept catching on the scar, not in morbid fascination, more like the way you looked at an old bridge that had survived floods and still carried travelers across. He remembered something his grandmother had said when he was a kid, when he'd scraped his knee and cried like the world had ended. Scars are just skin learning a new story. Lynn finished the reinforcement and sealed the composite. The crack dulled, edges knitting together as if relieved to be allowed to heal. He sat back on his heels. "That should do it. Give it 12 hours and it'll be stronger than before." Vorn looked down at the repaired seam, then at him. "You did not flinch." Lynn blinked. "At what?" "At me," she said, as if the answer was obvious. "Others do." Lynn felt heat crawl up his neck. "Well, I won't lie, you're intimidating." Vorn's eyes narrowed again, and Lynn hurried on. "But intimidating isn't the same as—" "Wrong," he said, "and your scar isn't wrong, it's its proof." "Proof," Vorn repeated, tasting the word. Lynn nodded. "Proof you survived what was meant to end you." A long silence. Vorn's translator clicked softly as it searched for something, then she said, "Among my people, scars are not spoken of with softness." "That seems unfair," Lynn said. Vorn's mouth tightened. "Softness is weakness." Lynn looked at her fully then, really looked, and saw something beneath the armor and the rank and the translator's steel. He saw exhaustion, not the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept, but the exhaustion of someone who had spent her whole life being strong because no one allowed her anything else. Lynn's voice came out gentler than he intended. "Commander, can I say something that might sound strange?" Vorn's gaze sharpened. "Speak." Lynn took a breath. He didn't want to compliment the wrong thing. He didn't want to reduce her to appearance. He didn't want to step into a cultural minefield, but the truth was already there and lying felt worse. "I think," he said slowly, "that you're beautiful." The translator processed, rendered the word into Veskari phonemes, then sent it out into the room. Vorn froze. It wasn't a metaphor. It was literal. Her body went still, breath caught mid-cycle. Even the faint rise and fall of her chest paused as if her lungs had forgotten their job. Lynn immediately regretted everything. "I'm sorry," he blurted. I didn't mean if that's offensive, Vorn's eyes were wide, her pupils, normally tight, had expanded, swallowing the slate blue. She stared at him as though he'd dropped a star into her lap. You used that word, she said, voice low. For me, Lynn swallowed hard. Yes, I meant it, not like decoration, not like pretty armor, like... He struggled, then gave up on precision and went honest. Like someone who carries storms and still stands, like something rare. Vorn's throat worked. The translator didn't catch whatever she said in her own language, something too quiet, too raw. Then she turned away sharply, reattaching a plate with a click that sounded too loud. Leave, she said. Lynn's stomach dropped. Okay, I will, I'm sorry. He gathered his kit and backed out, feeling like he'd stepped on a sacred bone. As the door sealed behind him, Lynn let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. In the corridor, the station felt too bright, too loud, too full of people who didn't understand what it meant to watch someone freeze because D offered them a kindness they didn't have armor for. 2 days later, the station alarms screamed. Lynn was in the auxiliary systems bay, arguing with a coolant pump that refused to accept its own diagnostics, when the lights shifted to emergency red. The intercom blared in 3 languages at once. Breach in Ring 7, unauthorized boarding, all personnel shelter. The pump could wait. Lynn sprinted into the corridor. Crew poured toward bulkheads, faces pale. Security drones zipped overhead. Somewhere distant, he heard the dull concussion of gunfire reverberating through metal. He should have run to shelter. Instead, he ran toward Dock 12, toward the Veskari cutter. Because if pirates had boarded the station, they would want the ship with the best weapons and the commander with the best reputation. And Lynn had repaired her ship. If anything went wrong, it would be his fault as much as hers. He reached the dock panting. The force field shimmered. The cutter sat still, dark and ready. 2 figures in mismatched armor lurked near its access hatch, cutting through the lock with a plasma saw. Their movements were hurried, greedy. Lynn's brain fired off options like sparks. He was unarmed. He was civilian. He was, by most galactic standards, expendable. But he had a toolkit and a lifetime of fixing things by understanding how they broke. He ducked behind a cargo crate and pulled out his data pad. The cutter's maintenance port still recognized his ID. He'd had temporary access codes during the repair. The port pinged. Lynn's fingers moved fast. He didn't have time to be elegant. He only needed to be effective. He redirected auxiliary power to the cutter's internal defense system. The Veskari cutter didn't use human-style turrets. It used pressure. A low thrum rose beneath the dock floor, so low Lynn felt it in his teeth. The pirates glanced around, confused. Then the air around the hatch thickened as if the universe had decided it was tired of being spacious. The pirates stumbled, their limbs suddenly heavy. The plasma saw wobbled, then clattered to the ground. One pirate cursed, trying to lift the tool. It moved like it weighed 100 kilos. Lynn grinned despite fear. Yeah, he whispered. Welcome to Veskari gravity etiquette. But the system wasn't designed for delicate use. If he kept the field up too long, it might damage the dock or worse, trigger a cascade in the station's own grav plates. He needed someone who could handle the rest. Commander Vorn, he muttered and jabbed the comm. No answer. He tried again, voice tight. Commander, it's Lynn. There are boarders at your hatch. I've pinned them with your internal field, but I can't hold it long. For a heartbeat, only static. Then, where are you? Her voice hard, awake. Behind cargo crates on Dock 12, Lynn said. 2 boarders, maybe more. Stay down, Vorn ordered. The cutter's hatch hissed. Vorn stepped out like a blade drawn from a sheath, armor fully sealed now, plates newly intact. In one hand she carried a compact weapon that looked like a folded piece of sculpture. In the other, nothing at all, which somehow made her more terrifying. The pirates saw her and tried to raise their guns. They couldn't. The gravity field held them like insects in amber. Vorn approached. Her steps were steady, unhurried, as if she had all the time in the galaxy. She stopped in front of the first pirate and tilted her head. "You chose my ship," she said. "Poor selection." The pirate spat a curse. Vorn didn't react. She lifted her weapon, aimed once, fired. The shot was silent. Pirate collapsed, armor smoking. The second pirate tried to crawl away, dragging himself with elbows. Vorn watched him go, then she looked toward Lin's hiding spot. "Release the field," she said. Lin's fingers hesitated over the controls. "If I release it, he'll run." "He will not," Vorn said. Lin believed her. He cut the field. The pirate surged up, suddenly light again, and bolted, and Vorn moved. Lin had seen martial artists, soldiers, even zero-G brawlers. None of them moved like Vorn. It wasn't speed, it was inevitability. She closed the distance in 2 strides and caught the pirate by the back of his armor, lifting him off the ground as easily as Lin lifted his kit bag. The pirate kicked, flailed. Vorn held him out at arm's length and spoke into her comm. "Security, Dock 12, 2 boarders neutralized, send containment." Then she looked at the pirate. "You will live," she said, "so you may describe your failure." She dropped him. He hit the floor hard, groaning. Security teams arrived moments later, weapons raised. They slapped restraints on the pirate, hauled him away. When the dock finally quieted, Vorn turned back to Lin. He stood slowly, legs shaky. Adrenaline had made him bold. Now it drained away, leaving him very aware that he'd nearly gotten himself killed with a toolkit and a stubborn sense of responsibility. Vorn approached until she was close enough that Lin had to tilt his head back to meet her gaze. "You disobeyed station protocol," she said. Lin managed a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm probably going to get yelled at for that." "You used my ship's defenses without permission," she continued. Lin's smile faltered. "Also, yes, but you saved my ship," Vorn finished. Lin blinked. "I tried." Vorn's helmet vents exhaled slowly. "Why?" "Because I didn't want you to be taken. Because I didn't want the galaxy to keep proving you right that softness is weakness. Because I didn't want my last words to you to be a stupid compliment that hurt you." Lin swallowed those answers. Instead, he said, "Because I fixed it. If someone breaks something I fixed, it feels personal." For a long moment, Vorn stared at him. Then very slowly, she lifted a hand and touched the reinforced seam on her armor, the one he'd repaired. "Human Lin Calder," she said, voice quieter than before. "Your words 2 days ago." Lin's stomach tightened. "If you want me to forget them." "I have tried," Vorn said, and something in her tone cracked like ice. "They remain." Lin opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know how to apologize for a kindness. He didn't know how to explain that he'd said it because it was true, and because truth shouldn't have to be weaponized. Vorn's hand lowered. "Among Veskari," she said, "beauty is spoken of as function, a strong blade, a sturdy hull, a warrior who does not fall." Lin nodded. "That makes sense." "But you," Vorn continued, "spoke it as if it were allowed, as if it required no permission." Lin breathed out. "Maybe it doesn't." Her gaze held his. Then she did something that made Lin's brain stutter. She removed her helmet. The dock's emergency lighting painted her features in red and shadow. Without the helmet, she looked less like a monument and more like a person, still formidable, yes, but now with small signs of wear. Faint lines at the corners of her eyes, a nick along her jaw ridge, the slightest tremor in her breath that the armor had hidden. "I have been called many things," Vorn said softly. "Weapon. Monster omen." Lynn's throat tightened again. "Never that," she said. Lynn took a careful step closer, still giving her space but not retreating. "Then let me say it again," he murmured. "Not because you're a commander, not because you're dangerous, because you're you." Vorn's eyes searched his face for deception and found only fear and sincerity tangled together. "Say," she commanded, but the words sounded less like an order now and more like a request she didn't know how to shape. Lynn met her gaze and spoke clearly, simply, like naming a star. "You're beautiful." This time she did not freeze. She closed her eyes just for a heartbeat, as if bracing for impact. When she opened them, they were bright, not with tears, because Veskari didn't cry the way humans did, but with something close enough that Lynn felt it like heat. "You humans," she said, voice rough, "carry softness as if it is armor." Lynn gave a small laugh. "It's not armor, it's gravity. It pulls us toward each other even when we're scared." Vorn studied him as if he just offered a new law of physics. Then she reached out slowly, openly, and placed 2 fingers against his collarbone, right over his heartbeat. The touch was light, careful, shockingly gentle for someone who'd crushed pirates into the deck. "I will attempt," she said, each word chosen with effort, "to learn this gravity." Lynn's breath caught. "I can help," he said. Vorn's mouth twitched again, that almost smile. "I know." Behind them, station workers peeked from safe distances, whispering. A few looked confused. A few looked relieved. One looked like he just watched a myth change shape. Vorn replaced her helmet and straightened, Commander again, the monument restored, yet something had shifted in the space around her as if the dock no longer needed to shrink. She turned toward her cutter, then paused. Without looking back, she said, "Human Lynn Calder." "Yeah, in my language," she said, "there is a word. It means the one who sees the unarmored." Lynn waited, heart loud. Vorn glanced over her shoulder. "That is what you are." Then she stepped into her ship, hatch sealing behind her with a final hiss. Lynn stood alone on Dock 12, red light fading back to normal, and realized his hands were trembling, not from fear, from the strange, dangerous hope that maybe the galaxy didn't have to keep choosing hardness as its only way to survive. Maybe sometimes you could mend what others couldn't. With tools, yes. And with a human's stubborn, ridiculous habit of calling truth by a gentle name.